Hello, all, and welcome to Divergent Discussions. I'm Tina, a career coach and data scientist, and I also have lived experience with autism and ADHD through people in my life. So I'm incredibly excited to be having this conversation with Ash today. And before we get started, just a quick note that this session is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube. And we'll also have time at the end for any audience questions. So feel free to drop any questions in the chat. And without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce our guest today, Ash. So Ash is the co-host of the ADHD Double Dose Podcast. Diagnosed as an adult, he shares how the ADHD brain works and how he can thrive. And with a master's in audiology, Ash has a particular passion for sound therapy and its emerging role in ADHD treatment. Ash, I'm so excited to have you here today, and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on, Tina. It's nice to chat, and yeah, hopefully people can learn a thing or two, but mainly just get something out of the session and feel a bit better about things.
Definitely,
Mm.
Ash. And for sure, I'm sure everyone will walk away with something amazing. And with that in mind, let's jump straight in.
Yeah, sure.
So, a lot of people with ADHD, they say they can't focus in silence, but they also get overwhelmed by noise. What's actually going on here?
Yeah, so it seems like a real contradiction, doesn't it? That, we ADHD is, I say we because I also am one of those ADHDers, but have trouble concentrating if it's completely silent, but also have difficulty if it's too noisy. So they actually refer to this as the silence noise paradox. So that's sort of contradiction. But if we delve a bit deeper, it actually does make sense when we understand the way ADHDers process sound, potentially compared to neurotypical people. Some of the why it makes sense will hopefully become clearer as you and I chat a bit more. So it's a broad first question. So I'll give you a general answer, but then we'll sort of drill down a bit. But we'll deal with the sort of noise side of things first. So why do ADHDers struggle in noise? And it helps to know a bit about what ADHD is typically sort of characterized by in order to help us understand. So I think we probably all accept now that ADHD is kind of the wrong label in that we don't really have a deficit of attention. It's more like we have a difficulty in terms of filtering attention or focusing rather than a deficit. It's almost like we pay attention to too much. In essence, we have difficulty filtering out things that aren't important to us, like sound. So in noise, there's a lot of sounds competing for our attention at any one time. There might be music, conversations, sudden loud sounds. So people with ADHD can become easily distracted from the task they're working on because there's so much to deal with and filter out. There's also quite a lot of evidence that people with ADHD have less effective filters to begin with compared to neurotypical people. So it makes sense that in noise we'd have trouble focusing. The question is then, why do we struggle in silence as well? And that's largely because our focus as an ADHDer is sort of driven a lot by motivation. So what we're interested in, what we're bored by. And we know that ADHDers generally need higher reward or higher dopamine activities to find a task interesting and stick to it. So if we're working on a task that's a little bit boring, our brain will already be seeking out other more rewarding, more interesting tasks. And as a result of that, if it's completely silent, then any little sound that happens in our environment can potentially be something that our brains latch onto as an escape from what we're already doing. So therein lies the problem with silent situations as well. There are lots of other reasons why both silence and noise can be affecting in terms of focus for an ADHDer, but we'll get to them when you ask me some more questions.
I love that. So with the noise, it sounds
Mm.
like on one hand, we have a filter that is very sensitive, but also very dusty and ineffective as well.
Mhm.
So in a way, it picks up on everything, but also doesn't pick up on everything very efficiently.
Yeah. Yep. So it's that real sort of paradox. What do you do if you can't focus very well in silence or in noise? Because our filter's not great at
Mhm.
filtering out the noise, but our brain is looking for distractions if a task is boring and it's quiet. Um, so slightly separate reasons, but cause the same issue. Luckily, we'll
Mm.
come up with some sort of tactics or strategies to help us deal with both of those situations.
Amazing. So thank you
Oh.
so much for explaining the why so clearly as well and
Mm.
having both those things coming up. So
Yes.
from your own experience as well, when someone is experiencing too much noise, where
Mm.
is their attention exactly? Is it focused on everything or one thing in particular? How does their attention work?
Yeah. So, in terms of feeling like that, sort of results in situations where your attention can feel inconsistent.
Mhm.
So, you can be focused one moment and then lose focus very quickly the next. So, it's sort of a difficult question to answer in terms of how much of that is driven by sound. But we can probably fairly say that sound is a major factor in terms of our attention. And there are other factors as well. But we know that, as we talked about, certain sounds can be particularly distracting to an ADHD, but we also know that it's much harder for an ADHD to refocus once they've been distracted. So our attention can be on the task at hand or where we want it, but momentarily distracted by sound or something else. And we have a greater difficulty turning our focus back to the task that we're supposed to be focusing on.
Mhm.
That's sort of how sound can be one of the quickest things to draw our attention. But ADHD or attention in ADHD is obviously affected by lots of other things too. So sleep, stress, novelty, our emotional state, how rewarding something is, whether our medication's working effectively or wearing off. So there's lots of factors, but sound is kind of one of the fastest environmental factors that can knock us off track.
And it
Mm.
seems like something we can
Mm.
definitely control better as well because it is one of those things that is right in front of us.
That's right. Yeah. Look, yes and no, in that these things tend to happen very automatically and subconsciously in terms of being distracted by sound. But you're right as well in the sense that it is one of the variables that we can try to control in order to help us. So, um, yeah, luckily we do have avenues to success, if you like, once we
Definitely.
understand things.
Yeah, and I'm so excited later to go through some of those avenues in terms of
Mm.
how we can use sound to our benefit
Yeah.
and what actually makes a sound helpful for focus versus distracting.
Yeah. So that's a good question. And I've got some notes on that. So I'm just going to skip through to the relevant notes there. So, what we're basically looking for there is what qualities of sound might work for us versus what might be more likely to be distracting. And that's a really important question because the characteristics and the quality of the sound really do make a difference to how effective they are. So, essentially, the research and the evidence shows us that sounds that are steady, predictable, repeatable, and non linguistic, so don't have any speech, and also are emotionally neutral, so don't evoke a strong reaction in us, are usually the most helpful in terms of helping an ADHDR focus without becoming distracted by the sound. The opposite of that is unhelpful sounds like speech based sounds. So if someone's talking to you or about a topic you're interested in, sudden sounds in particular, much harder to filter out, and sound that changes quickly or rapidly or is emotionally charged. So if it makes us feel a certain way, then we're much likely to have our attention drawn to it. So in essence, those sort of sounds are just likely to be too distracting. So we want something interesting, but not so interesting that we're likely to become distracted by it immediately. Yeah. And some of those sort of sounds that have the qualities we want are things like, I imagine we'll come back to this, but white noise, rain on a roof, or music that's designed to have those particular qualities that are less distracting for an ADHDer. So they're the ones you should seek out. Ones to avoid are things like your favorite song or, a podcast that you find really interesting. While it might seem like they're a good thing to have on in the background, likely to be far too interesting when you're trying to complete potentially a boring task.
Like this podcast, for example.
You can have this podcast on at any time. That will always be good. Always good to be distracted by caboose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and you mentioned white noise as well. From your experience, what's the difference between white noise, pink noise, and brown noise?
Yeah. Yep. So they're sort of really popular terms at the moment, white noise, brown noise, pink noise. But they're essentially just different ways of describing different types of sound energy. So essentially sound is just vibration energy through the air that our ear picks up. So white noise is basically sound with equal amounts of energy at each different pitch, or each frequency is another way of saying pitch. I think sort of a good way to understand white noise is if you had a piano keyboard in front of you and you hit every note on the piano keyboard at the same time and with the same force, then you'd get equal volume across each note. And that's basically what white noise is. It's equal energy at every pitch. Brown noise, on the other hand, is basically energy at each pitch, but slightly more bass than mid pitches and treble. So if you think of your piano keyboard, you're getting more sound out of the lower notes than anything else on the keyboard. Pink noise, same idea, but instead of turning up the bass, so hitting the lower notes more, we're not hitting the high notes with as much force. So same amount of bass and mid pitches, less treble. Actually, I've got a diagram that might sort of give you an idea of what that looks like. So bear with me while I try and get that one up.
Yep, no stress.
All right. We'll see if the sharing of my screen works. You can tell me if it doesn't.
Okay.
All right, we want that one. Let's chat. Okay, so we've got the diagram, but it's the wrong one. So bear with me while I try and put up the correct one. Okay. No, it still hasn't. You will see that graph later on, but it's not the one we want right now. Let's have another go.
We should be playing white noise in the background of this particular interview for everyone.
Good work. Excellent. Very clever. Okay, so that's the graph I want, and I'll increase the size of it. So essentially, we've got white noise here, which is a straight line because we've got pitch down the bottom, volume on the side. So it's equal energy at every pitch. Then we've got pink noise, which, as I was saying, is same amount of low pitch sound as white noise, but we're slowly getting less and less energy the higher pitch we get. Brown noise, same again, but this time you can see the bass starts a lot higher. So more bass dominant than mid or high pitches. So basically, I'll try and stop sharing that now. Am I back with you?
Yep.
Yep. So those terms are basically just ways of describing different types of sound energy. Interestingly, white noise is the only type of noise that's scientifically shown to help focus with people with ADHD. So they've done studies on pink noise and brown noise, but at the moment, white noise is the one that shows statistically significant benefit. Yeah, and I'll stop talking soon and let you ask another question. But the really fascinating thing about white noise is that when they get an ADHDer and a neurotypical person to perform the same task, if they get the ADHDer to listen to white noise, their performance on that task will be slightly better than if they listen to nothing. But the neurotypical person, if they complete the same task while listening to white noise, they will do slightly worse on that task than if they were listening to nothing. So it's a very small effect, but it's still, the science still shows that white noise is helping an ADHD focus, which I think is fascinating in that it shows that there is a genuine difference between our brains and neurotypical people's brains in that the same noise can cause better performance for one of us, worse performance for the other. Yeah, to me, that's pretty fascinating. But yeah, white noise is the go-to of the colors.
That's incredibly fascinating. I love that. And I'm so curious what's actually happening in the ADHD's brain when their concentration improves from white noise.
Yeah. Yep. So what you're essentially getting at there is sort of what's happening neurologically. So what's happening in our brain. And this is where our understanding is still developing. So there are a couple of sort of competing theories on this. So one theory is that our brain has to essentially, as we were talking about before, really, choose between a signal that it wants to listen to and a whole lot of noise that's not relevant. So it works out what's important and tries to focus on that, and what's not important and filter that out. So one theory is that the neurological signal in our brains, in people with ADHD, the signal overall is just a little bit weaker than neurotypical people, specifically the signal for dopamine and noradrenaline, which governs sort of reward, motivation, and focus. But if they're a little bit lower than normal in terms of activity, there's a theory that by introducing constant white noise or sound, it brings up the signal of the brain a little bit overall. So the signal in general is a little bit higher now, which means that the whole system is boosted a little bit. So the important dopamine and noradrenaline signals that before were a bit too low to be useful to us or to have an impact on us are now being amplified just a little bit more than they would normally, because our internal system has to make them a little bit louder to get over the background noise of the sound. So it's essentially a process that scientists call stochastic resonance. And it's sort of still under researched. It's still just a theory. We can't prove this yet. But again, that would be fascinating if that's the way that sound can be used to actually sort of boost the signals that are underperforming in the brain of an ADHDer. So that's one way in which we think it can help us, or one way in which we think the brain is changing based on sound. Yeah. The second theory is that the brain of an ADHD just needs a little bit more stimulation to make things interesting. Otherwise, we're likely to get bored and lose focus or interest. So in some ways, by introducing sound, again, sound of the right quality, then we're giving our brain or our neurons something to be entertained by or something to focus on so that we can get on with the important sort of work, because the distracted part of our brain's occupied and happy enough. One way I like to think about that is it's kind of like if you see a parent at a supermarket trying to get through the checkout and their toddler's screaming next to them because they want a lolly or something like that. And then you see the parent just hand their phone to their toddler and suddenly they're absorbed by the screen so that the adult can get what they need to do done. In some ways, white noise might work in the same way. We're giving the toddler part of our hearing system something to do that's entertaining so we can do the real work. Again, just theories at this stage, but theories that are worth investigating further. And that's what, researchers are doing at the moment.
I love that analogy as well. And
Yeah.
those two theories at the moment. So the first one sounds like it's just it just helps our brain overall have a higher, I guess, well, it elevates it to overcome.
Yeah.
And then the second one is it's a distraction as well.
Yep.
And I'm curious, is it the same with pink and brown noise?
Yeah. Yep. So the answer to that is it probably is the same with pink and brown noise in that they're still just types of sound that have the qualities we want. They don't have speech. They're not changing rapidly. They're not sudden. They're not evoking an emotion. But for some reason, when they do studies on how effective white noise is versus brown noise and pink noise, it's only the white noise that is statistically significant in terms of helping. That might be that, we're doing the wrong kind of studies, or there's something about white noise we don't yet understand. But maybe it's that having equal energy at each pitch that's doing the special things, whatever that is. Yeah, so focus on the white noise is what the research is telling us at the moment. But yeah, it would work in similar ways.
I wonder what would happen if we played all the noises at the same time.
Brown mixed with pink mixed with white. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's a very good area of research. I might have to give that a go. That might be amazing. Maybe you should patent that actually, just in case.
Patent
Create
it.
your own app.
Definitely. And on that as well, so you're talking about the two theories, and is it more about stimulation, regulation, or do you think it's something else that's going on?
Yeah. So I think what is happening there is it's more about regulation probably. So we're basically more able to regulate our focus if the signal that we're trying to listen to is a bit boosted by sound. So the stronger focus that we're wanting to utilize is able to get through if the signal's a bit stronger. But yeah, in terms of the second theory, so occupying parts of our brains that might distract us, then yeah, that's again about having the space to regulate our attention more readily. So those theories are kind of competing in some ways. It's unlikely that both of them will turn out to be right, but it's probably more about regulation, I would say, at that point.
Yep.
I didn't explain that very well, but does that make some sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Good.
And from there on as well, how is this related to binaural beats?
Binaural beats?
Binaural
Yeah.
beats.
Yeah. So binaural beats are, again, another sort of buzzword at the moment in terms of ADHD and sound therapy in general. What binaural beats are is that basically you can play two slightly different tones in each ear. So a separate tone in this ear, separate tone in the other ear. And if you play them in a certain way, then your brain perceives a third sort of beat or pitch. So a pitch that's not really there, but your brain creates it. there's a theory that listening to binaural beats can sort of, synchronize brain rhythms and shift mental states. There's actually no evidence when we look at the science that that's the case. So, of white noise and other sound therapy apps and things like that, binaural beats actually has the least evidence in terms of helping ADHDers focus. It can be cool to listen to in that, you will eventually notice a third sound, and that's, some people find it relaxing, which can have positive effects on focus. But in and of itself, no evidence yet that binaural beats are effective.
Yeah. Take that by beats.
Yeah.
And this is purely a very curious question from my perspective.
Mm,
So I know that back in the caveman days, people would listen to songs or play songs around the campfire.
mm,
And now today we're also listening to songs and it changes our mood, it changes our
mhm,
focus, it changes something in our brain. What
mm.
is it about music or sound that does that for us?
Yeah. So we're getting into getting into the territory of neuroscience, which I'm not. I'm an audiologist, but I don't want to misrepresent, my expertise there. But I do understand about the impact that sound has on people in general, and can probably relate that to ADHDers. But once upon a time, you mentioned caveman sort of days, sound would have been all about keeping us safe. So is that rustling in a bush over there a tiger that's about to eat me and I need to get ready to, fight or freeze or run? So, um, you know, basically we're programmed to be, speaking of sound, that's my dog, we're programmed to be very alert to changes in sounds, threatening sounds in order to keep us safe. It's just innate. So sound can evoke a very strong response in terms of gearing us up to be scared or fearful. But the
Mhm.
opposite of that is sounds can also have the quality of calming our nervous system, um, you know, just provide us with enjoyment in terms of distracting us from, negative thoughts and feelings, things like that. So it does make sense that in, sort of caveman days, we recognize that sound was crucial to keeping us alive. And therefore we had a strong reaction to it. So it makes sense that we'd also have a strong reaction to the positive aspects of sound.
Mhm.
And to link that back to ADHD and neurodiversity in general, there is evidence that, you know, ADHDers and people with autism might be a bit more sensitive to those changes in sound and their environment. So potentially more susceptible to those impacts. But yeah, I suspect that's why they were sitting around a campfire singing songs because, it was probably the opposite of the scary sounds that they'd hear during the day.
Wow, I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
You're
And
welcome.
yeah, when you were mentioning how it affects people with ADHD and autism, how does
Um,
sound also contribute to sensory overload with people?
Yeah. So we once thought that sound sensitivity was sort of primarily related to autism rather than ADHD. But that's slowly changing in terms of, as our understanding of the way ADHD is process sound, develops. But probably the best way to explain that is using the sort of spoon theory that's become popular more recently. So that's basically the idea that we've all got a certain number of spoons in any one day that we can use to complete certain tasks. So, for example, emptying your dishwasher, you might have to use 3 spoons for that. Something like driving to work, because it becomes fairly automatic, might only use 1 spoon. And the theory goes that people with ADHD or autism, it requires more spoons for the same task than for a neurotypical person. So, for example, emptying the dishwasher, I might have to use 5 spoons for that, whereas a neurotypical person will only use 2. So, the same goes for sound. We've discussed that part of what our brain has to do is filter out unimportant, unwanted sound. And that uses spoons. We have to devote a certain number of spoons to just hearing and particularly filtering out noise. So if an ADHDer is in a noisy place, they're burning through their spoons much quicker than a neurotypical person just trying to cope with that environment. And there are ways of sort of getting spoons back, but if you're not given the time to get spoons back, then you can very quickly run out of spoons. And that's when we start to feel that sense of sensory overload. I'm no longer able to filter out this noise at all. It's all becoming a bit too much. And yeah, we think that's the reason behind that phenomenon, in that we're just using more cognitive energy existing in that environment. That's also closely linked, we think, to ADHD burnout, in that if you've got no more spoons to give, then you become burnt out from those environments. Yeah, so I think that's a good way of thinking about why we end up with sensory overload potentially.
Yep. And is there a particular sound or music that we can use to help prevent this?
Yeah, so there are certainly things we can do in order to preserve the spoons that we've got, if you like. And I think that the evidence goes towards sounds that have the qualities we talked about, that aren't sudden, too loud, distracting, things like that. Um, there's essentially ways we can create in our environment situations that are less, spoon hungry, if you like. So I'll just skip my notes on sort of creating an environment that might be helpful. Bear with me for a moment.
Yep, no problem. We'll definitely go back to that as well in terms of more
Yeah.
practical things we can do at the end.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So look, the sort of obvious things you can do are try to avoid situations where lots of people are talking around you if you're trying to focus on a task. Other things you can do are avoid areas where there's likely to be sudden sound, such as dropping plates or, kids running around, those sort of sudden, unpredictable sounds if you're trying to, focus on work. Yeah, sometimes it's things like your acoustic environment. So you can try and avoid big open halls with reflective surfaces because the sound tends to bounce around in those environments and become a bit more overwhelming. But in terms of the quality of the sound, again, the research says that, um, you know, nice, calming, constant sounds much better than, you know, your favorite song or speech or podcast. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. As fun as that might be.
As fun as it might be, indeed.
Mm.
And if someone wants to experiment, what kind of tools and apps would you recommend?
Yeah. Yep. So I'll again just head to that part. So there are lots of apps out there at the moment that claim to be able to help focus and attention. So I think you've got to sort of have a healthy skepticism about which ones that might be true about and which ones aren't, because it can be hard to tell what's sort of evidence based and got some science behind it, and what's not as evidence based and potentially after money, to put it bluntly. So yeah, I've written down some that are better than others, and one in particular that I like. So there's one. They're all sort of variations on the same theme, but some names are Endel, Noisy is an app, or Noisely. Flocus is another app. So obviously that's a cross between Focus and Flow. You can even just look up Spotify playlists that you know have an hour of white noise can be effective. YouTube playlists that are centered around helping people with ADHD focus. Again, some are better than others, and you need to sort of work out whether the sound has the qualities that we mentioned before in order to be helpful. But probably the best app that I've found so far is called brain.fm. And yeah, it's relatively well known at this point. So if people sort of, Google top 10 apps for ADHD focus, it's often number one. The reason that I like it is that it does purport to be evidence-based. So they've been careful to construct sounds that meet the criteria that the research shows helps people with ADHD focus. So it doesn't have lyrics. It's not overly stimulating, but at the same time, it's not just rain on a roof. So, which can become boring very quickly. So it's carefully crafted. You can in fact select sort of what your purpose is. So whether you're trying to relax, whether you're trying to focus, whether you're trying to and it will tailor the sound for your particular purpose. Again, none of this is regulated yet. They can make the claim that it assists focus without much evidence to back it up. But Brain FM seems to be at least trying to stick to the science. It's not just elevator music that a lot of them seem to be. And I sit there trying to listen to it thinking, this is just too boring. I might as well have silence. So it avoids that. I think you can do a free version or there's a paid version. It's not terribly expensive, and it's personally, this is me deviating from the research here. This is just my personal opinion. I've found it to be the most helpful, but I do have an ADHD related story to that. I signed up for a free trial to Brain FM thinking that could work. This is sort of before I got interested in the science behind it all. And I think the trial was 3 months. And you can imagine what happened. I promptly forgot all about the trial. 3 months came and went, and before I know it, I've paid for a year of Brain FM. So luckily, I'm enjoying it. But yeah, if you've got ADHD, be careful about cancelling your trial to Brain FM if you go down that path.
The ADHD tax.
Absolutely. That's the ADHD tax, in effect.
I love it. I love how you use Brain FM. Thank you so much for that recommendation as well. And out of curiosity, does Brain FM, because we touched upon earlier, transition as well? It's hard for us to transition from one to the next task.
Yes.
And I'd imagine that white noise plays a part in helping us focus and staying in one spot.
Mhm.
But is there any research or any music or personal experiences that helps one to get up from one task and transition to the next one?
Yeah, good question. In terms of music or apps or sound that's specifically designed for transitioning tasks, I'm not aware of any sort of sounds that's used specifically for that yet. In that this is all a very, it's still a fairly new area in terms of ADHD treatment, if you like. But how they've found it helps with transitioning is the way in which sound can sort of cover up or mask, if you like, sounds that would potentially be distracting to us. So probably the best way to describe this, if you imagine that you're and we're going to use sort of sight as the example here rather than sound, but the principle's the same. So if you imagine sitting in a pitch black, fairly small room where there's absolutely no light, you've got your eyes open, but you can't see anything. If someone lights a match in the corner of that room, your attention is going to be immediately drawn to the sudden flash of light over in the corner, because there's just no competing light or stimuli to distract you from that one event. So that event takes on more importance. Now imagine exactly the same room, but it's a bright sunny day outside and you've got all the fluorescent lights on in the room. You've still got your eyes open, but someone now lights a match in the corner. You're almost not going to notice it because there's already so much light and stimuli going on that suddenly that light over there doesn't seem as relevant or important. It's therefore less distracting. So that's one another way in which we can use these apps and sound is by covering up sounds that in silence would become distracting to us. So, in answer to your question, when we're transitioning from one task to another, we don't necessarily want to become, as soon as we sort of unlock from focusing on what we don't want to suddenly become aware of all the little sounds that are going on. So by masking them out in some ways, we're more likely to be able to then go to the next task without a distraction in between. Yeah. Does that make some kind of sense?
Yep. It sounds like a theme with the sounds is
Mm,
contrast. It's if there's a huge contrast, we can draw our attention to it or away from it as well. And what you're saying,
yeah.
from what I can hear, is if we're moving from one task to the other, if we put something over the sounds that we can't already hear, it will
Mhm.
just make it a smoother transition.
Yes. Yeah. You're exactly right. So that's a good way of describing it. And that smooth transition is what we're looking for in terms of task switching. So
Mhm.
if we can minimize the likelihood of being distracted while we switch tasks, and obviously I'm more familiar with the sound sort of side of that, then we're more likely to successfully re-engage with the next task. But
So
yeah,
that
you're
would
right.
be playing Taylor Swift from one task to the next.
Yep. Playing Taylor Swift, depending on your opinion of Taylor Swift and how much you like her, might be too distracting. Certainly for my 13-year-old daughter, that would be way too distracting. Um,
That's fair.
but
It
fun.
it would be fun for sure.
Yeah.
So, is there a particular sound? I guess it depends on personal preference, right, from one to the other. But
Mm,
for someone who personally struggles from getting from
mhm.
one task to the next,
Yeah.
where can they start?
Yeah. Yep. So I think in terms of choosing your preferred sound, that's a good point. Because, oh, there's my dog again. Um, Try to filter out that sound. Yeah. If, in terms of preferred sound, we do need the sounds to have a particular quality, like we've spoken about, but
Mhm.
it doesn't mean that you have to sit there and endure something that you find genuinely boring. So that's where apps like, Brain FM help in that they've got a wide enough variety that if you're finding Rain on the Roof boring, there are tracks that are slightly more interesting, slightly more complex than just constant white noise, but still fit within the boundaries of what's not likely to distract us, if that makes sense. So we don't tip over into the Taylor Swift side of things. We're still within the ADHD focus side of things.
Brain FM should have a sponsored Taylor Swift section only.
Yes, that's true. They need a section where when you've completed your work successfully, then you can go and be distracted by Taylor Swift. That's true.
I love that. Please sponsor us on
Yes,
Brain FM.
absolutely.
From what you're saying, it sounds like it's a matter of just experimenting. So the first sound
Mm,
might be either too boring or too stimulating, and then just keep trying and don't give up
yeah.
until you found a good sound for you.
That's right. And you might also find that different sounds are appropriate in different environments or depending on how many spoons you've got at any one moment. So you don't have to settle on one sound. You might find that different sounds are effective at different times.
Yep.
I should also say, while I've got the chance as a good audio, well, you know, as an audiologist who's got ear health in mind, definitely don't play these sounds too loud. Um, so loud sounds over a long duration can damage your hearing. So we're not talking about blasting yourself with sound to the point where you can't hear anything else. Important to use common sense and be safe about the volume.
Definitely. I,
Mm,
I agree wholeheartedly. I was that kid that just blasted everything in my ear, and now
mm.
I cannot hear that well. So
Yeah, yep. It's a real thing, unfortunately.
definitely. Thank you. And then
Mm.
for the graph, you had a nice graph before. Would you still
Yeah.
like to show the audience?
Let's see if I can get that graph up again. I will
Nice
have
parabola.
to. Yes, that's right. I know it's still there. It's just a matter of finding it. There we go. All right, now I should be able to share it with you. There it is. Okay, so do we need to zoom in on that? Is that a bit hard to see?
Looks okay to
Yep.
from. Yep.
Yep, good. Okay. So basically, what this graph is showing is what we've talked about along the way. So essentially, that difference between, or that midpoint between being in silence and being understimulated to being in noise that's too distracting, um, and finding that place in the middle. So essentially along the bottom, we've got the amount of auditory or sound stimulation that's going on in the environment. On the left, we've got our ability to focus. So on the left, we've obviously got an auditory or a sound environment that's just too understimulating for someone with ADHD. There's not enough going on, too easily distracted or bored by, too likely to notice little sounds. So our concentration and our focus is going to be very low as well. Then we get to this, what they've deemed the best zone. So the zone in which most productivity and focus occurs. So this is where, again, we've got our steady, predictable, sort of low information, but occupying sound. So this is your Brain FM or your white noise or rain on the roof sort of sound. And at this point, it's positively affecting our ability to focus. We're doing well here in the best zone. But once we tip over that to more stimulating sound, so, speech, unpredictable sounds, alarms, intermittent noise, that kind of thing, this is where suddenly we get to a point where our focus begins to dip again. These sounds are just too distracting. So, yeah, it's just a nice visual representation of the spot in the middle where we want to, as we've said, be able to use sound to our advantage. It's in that middle section there.
The golden.
That's right. It's just right. That's true.
It's just right. I love it. Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing that. And
No worries.
whilst people are trying to find that Goldilocks zone themselves,
Uh-huh.
what's one of the biggest challenges or blockers that they could come across?
One of the biggest challenges in terms of sound. Yeah.
In terms of finding the right sound for them.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's easy to err on the side of sound that's a bit too stimulating. So because people with ADHD have a tendency to seek out immediate reward and, something that is engaging and interesting, we're more likely to dance music or rave music, something like that, in order to sort of be more interesting. But that's not really what we're trying to achieve through the use of sound. So I would start on the end of being potentially a little bit too uninteresting rather than a little bit too interesting. And keep an open mind, give it a go at the potentially too uninteresting end of the spectrum. And you might be surprised at how helpful that is in terms of maintaining your focus. Because remember, the goal is not to listen to the music or the sound at that time. The goal is to maintain your focus on what you're trying to. And the sound is just a tool to help us do that. So I think your goal needs to shift from, I want to be interested and enjoy the sound, to I'm actually trying to get something done here. So I think the biggest challenge is avoiding the really interesting sound and finding the more effective sound. Other challenges, obviously, are in environments where we can't control the sound. So the world is very much, as we now know, set up for neurotypical people. There's a real push for open plan offices, hot desking where you don't sit in the same spot twice. And that can be really, really challenging for someone with ADHD in the sense that it's playing up to all the factors we don't want. You're likely to be able to have someone just walk up to the desk next to you and start talking. You can end up with an environment where there's a cacophony of sound around you because there's no walls. You no longer have your own space and office. So that can be really challenging. And workplaces are becoming a bit more cognizant of this, but it might take a bit of self-advocacy to explain to those you work around that sound has a bigger impact on you than it might other people. Yeah, so they're the challenges around finding the right sound, but also creating the right environment, which can be hard.
That is hard. And
Mm.
there was a time where I worked
Uh-huh.
in an office and they had a thing called Africa Day. And they
Right.
just played Africa by Toto for the whole day in
Oh
the
my
background.
goodness. The whole day.
For the whole day because it was Africa Day. It was actually really funny. It
Mm,
was it was a great workplace. I loved it.
good.
But yeah, I can definitely see what you mean by it
Yeah.
being
I
very
imagine by the 20th time you'd heard that song, it wasn't as funny.
it came in ebbs and flows. It was funny and then it was not funny and then funny and then
Yeah.
not funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair
And
enough.
so it sounds like self-advocacy and I
Mm.
guess playing white noise on headphones but not too loud for ear health and finding a quiet area. And that sounds
Yeah.
like pretty much the realm of control people can have if they are in
Yeah.
a open office situation.
Yeah, look, that's the best place to start. In that sense too, AirPods and headphones can be a really effective, immediate way of changing your acoustic environment. If you can't change the sort of wider environment around you in terms of sound, you can alter what makes it into your ears, by using AirPods or headphones. Probably not as effective long term, but if you need to get something done and you can't change your environment, it is a quick, effective way of using sound to your advantage.
Yep, definitely.
Mm.
And I can see today we're focusing on what we can control,
Mm,
and especially if it's something that's in our environment and it's quick as well. So sound
that's right.
is
Mm.
100%. And Brain FM and Taylor Swift. And what's one piece of advice that you'd want
Mm,
to tell someone uh who's been listening to this podcast and
mm.
wants to get better with using sound for their life?
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I think the important takeaway about all of this really, and it applies more generally to people with ADHD and neurodivergent people, is that we're often construed as lazy or lacking discipline, or that it's somehow a matter of effort that we're failing to focus in these environments. We now know that that's very rarely the case. It's not that we're not trying hard enough. It's that our brains are genuinely set up differently, and in such a way that it will be harder for us to succeed in those environments. So it's important to, have some self-compassion, some understanding around that, and lay off the sort of blame in that it's certainly not a weakness on your behalf. So your reaction to sound is not imagined and it's not about effort or laziness. So I think that's the most important thing to take away, is that all the science is showing this stuff is real in terms of, the effects of sound on those with ADHD. So like many other things. So um yeah, keep that in mind and do what you can in terms of using sound to help.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for ending on that note and
Mm,
a bit of self-compassion as well, because I can understand
yeah,
it can be a very critical experience both from inside and outside. So
yep.
thank you so much, Ash, for
Awesome.
your time today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, if anything resonated with all of you today, check out
Mm,
Neuronuggets on Caboose app. And if you want to go check out Ash, go check out his podcast as well, Double Dose. And where else can
mhm.
people find you, Ash?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram as Mr. Ashley Duns, and you can also find my contact details through the Caboose app, I think, under the presenter profile. The ADHD Double Dose podcast is on a break at the moment, but you can absolutely go back and listen to the 14 episodes we have out now. But I'm also working on a new podcast called ADHD Fact Check, because I'm somewhat sick of seeing misinformation spread on social media largely. So the idea will be to take a myth that's sort of gone viral on social media and then examining that to figure out if it's real or not. So keep an eye out for that podcast, which will be out over the next few months.
Woohoo! So excited.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank
Thanks
you
so
so
much for
much,
having
Ash.
me.
Thank you. And thanks
Mm,
everyone else for being here as well. Bye,
mm.
everyone.